Welcome back to a Book a Day podcast. We were discussing this book called Meaning of Life from the School of Life, and so far we discussed sources of meaning, and there were 8 in that. First is love, then family, work, friendship, culture, politics, nature, and philosophy. I also mentioned that it's quite unfair that they haven't mentioned religion as one of the sources of meaning in our lives. Anyway, now I'll move on to the second part of the book, which talks about the obstacles to meaning. What are the challenges that we can face? What are the things that stop us from achieving meaning in life? And there are 5 obstacles that have been mentioned in the book. Of course, there will be many more, but let's just stay within the context of the book and discuss these 5 obstacles. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read certain passages from the book, and you'll get clarity on what these 5 obstacles are and how they create a challenge in achieving meaning of life. So first one is vague self-understanding. Let me read. It says, we want our lives to be meaningful, but there is too often a gap between our intentions and our realities. Some of the obstacles to meaning are external, wars, financial turmoil, etc. But there are several issues in our own minds that block access to a more meaningful existence. We may be aware of having meaningful experiences, but lack the investigative vigor to identify their origins and makeup, and therefore fail to know how to recreate them and integrate them more reliably in our lives. We may, for example, have a particularly interesting evening with a friend. We are amazed by the conversation, wish it could happen more often, and yet are at a loss as to how to engineer a more regularly satisfying social life. Or we may go on a holiday with our family, which for once works well. But we don't stop to examine why, and the next time around end up on a break marred by the usual litany of arguments and dissatisfactions. At work, a specific project may play to our strengths, but we are unable to decode quite why, and are later moved to another department where we never again exert ourselves with comparable creativity. At home, once in a while, we find that we have a tender, playful, and cathartic conversation with our partner, but cannot understand in detail what might lie behind the heartwarming interlude. Our meaningful moments threaten to be like beautiful squares in a foreign city that we stumble into at night, but can never find our way back into in the light of day. We recognize their value without knowing how to rediscover them. We do not interpret them as the threads of a tapestry of meaning that we need to discover and hold on to across the labyrinth of our lives. We continue to encounter meaning a little too much by chance. We forage rather than systematically harvest. So that was the first challenge. Second one is provincialism. How that affects our capacity to find meaning? Let's see. Let me read from the book. Another reason why we hold back from the things that yield meaning is that they can seem abnormal. We know they are valuable, we are just afraid of seeming weird by pursuing them. We may really like getting up at 3 a.m., having a long bath in the dark and thinking for hours about our childhoods. In our social lives, a real preference might be to see people for one on one conversations where the agenda would be abstract and announced beforehand. With our work, we know we do our best thinking in railway station cafes rather than in cubicle where people expect us to be. On holiday, we have a yearning to visit the local sewage works and electricity plant rather than the beach or museum. But haunted by the fear of being abnormal, we can end up following few of our authentic inclinations. The pity is that we probably take our cue about what is normal from a specific and not particularly representative group of people, those who just happen to be in the vicinity. The oppressive impact of a local clan is what used to make school especially dispiriting. 14-year-olds have very emphatic ideas about what counts as normal. In the provincial micro society of school, it might have been normal to think that if someone had unfashionable shoes, they should be insulted at break time, that an enthusiasm for study was contemptible, or that being a footballer represented the summit of existence. As soon as we left school, we realized that what counted as normal there wasn't normal at all. We learned that our old classmates were, in fact, highly provincial, that is, cockily sure, but utterly wrong in thinking that their narrow beliefs were universal markers of truth and value. The problem with this susceptibility to provincial patterns of thinking is that it may pursue us beyond the school gates. At work, people may take it for granted that a holiday must be taken somewhere sunny. If we were to announce that we were going to spend a week in the Netherlands to admire the grey cloud banks, we might be mocked and patronized. Or there might be a powerful consensus in our social circle that on Sundays it is a sign of virtue to have a long lunch in company, and that anyone who prefers to spend time alone writing up their journal must be distinctly odd and suspect. But in truth, many ideas of normality are neither universal nor incontestable. It would be wholly possible to assemble large groups of impressive people who would take quite contrary views. In the company of 17th century Dutch landscape painters, admiring grey clouds would be a prime virtue. If we lived around Balzac, Baudelaire, or Proust, our apparently eccentric preferences for lying in bed thinking on weekends would be taken for granted. A pursuit of a meaningful life can become fatally derailed by ideas of what is normal that are not actually normal. We should not so much abandon the notion of fitting in as imaginatively reconfigure who we want to fit in with, and it might not be those in our immediate vicinity. We should dare to create our own imaginative communities to liberate us from the more inhibiting and asphyxiating assumptions of our neighbors. So that was the second obstacle. Now, third one. Third one is selflessness. It says, we are highly attuned to the notion that being selfish is one of the worst character traits we might possess, a way of behaving associated with greed, entitlement, and cruelty. And yet, some of the reasons we fail to have the lives we should springs from an excess of the opposite trait, an overweening modesty, an over hasty deference to the wishes of others, a dangerous and counterproductive lack of selfishness. We are at risk because we fail to distinguish between good and bad versions of selfishness. The good, desirable kind involves the courage to give priority to ourselves and our concerns at particular points. The confidence to be forthright about our needs, not in order to harm or conclusively reject other people, but in order to serve them in a deeper, more sustained, and committed way over the long term. Bad selfishness, on the other hand, operates with no greater end in view and with no higher motive in mind. We do not decline to help so as to marshal our resources to offer others a greater gift down the line. We just cannot be bothered. Unfortunately, afflicted by confusion about this distinction, we frequently fail to state our needs as clearly as we should, with the disastrous results for those we are meant to serve. In order to be a good parent, we may need to have an hour to ourselves every day. We may need to take a long time in a hot shower so as to mull over events. We may need to do something that seems a bit indulgent, like taking a live drawing class or a piano lesson. But because we sense how contrary to expectations these desires can seem, we opt to stay quiet about our requirements, and so grow increasingly ragged, angry, and bitter with those who rely on us. A lack of selfishness can slowly turn us into highly disagreeable as well as ineffective people. To take another example, we may find that our mind is at its best immediately after dinner, and yet know the family tradition of spending 20 minutes tidying up the kitchen together following a meal. We accept that it would look selfish to others to slip out at this point. We would be mocked and cast aside. So we mop the floor and scrub the potato to dish and don't work out how to rearrange the cash flow in the company or practice a speech for the conference, initiatives that would in the long term have been of greater use to those we love than our resentful and agitated domestic efforts. Good selfishness grows out of an accurate understanding of what we need to do in order to maximize our utility for others. It stems from an unembarrassed sense of how we should develop our abilities, get our minds into the right frame, summon up our most useful powers, and organize our thoughts and feelings so that they can eventually be helpful to the world. We recognize that we will, at select moments, have to back out of doing things that people would like us to, and have no compunction about politely explaining this, unlike the selfless who will dutifully smile, then one day explode into vindictive, exhaustive rage. We know, as kind egoists, that we may be confused with the mean spirited, but our innate conviction in our sincerity lends us the calm to pursue our aims in our own way. The trick is to become better ambassadors of our intentions, learning persuasively to convey to those around us that we are not lazy or callous, but will simply better serve their needs by not doing the expected things for a while. We avoid becoming a nuisance to those around us by what is only ever superficially a good idea, always putting other people first. So that was the third obstacle, and it teaches us that we need to become a little selfish from time to time. The fourth one is quite interesting. It is immortality. How that is an obstacle, how that idea is an obstacle, let's see. Let me read from the book. We rightly think that fear is the enemy of the well-lived life, but there is a powerful way in which fear can play an opposite and more constructive role. It can be the psychological force that positively propels us towards a more meaningful existence. One of the big obstacles to meaning is the feeling that we have time to get around to the important things. We recognize where the sources of meaning lie, but lack our urgency in focusing on them, because we will address them tomorrow, at the end of the month, or next year. We have a hazy supposition that time is unlimited. The horrific but inevitable fact of our own mortality is kept at bay for the most sympathetic of reasons. We can't bear the brevity of our own existence. But in so doing, we fail to give our lives the meaningful direction they deserve. We give in to localized, small scale obstructions. The worry that something is a touch dull, the fear of looking a bit of a fool, the pain of being rejected, the awkwardness of not fitting in, the annoyance of having to make yet another effort in the same old direction. We don't persist with worthwhile things through the suffering they involve, and in the process end up slowly running the time we have left. A decisive barrier to the more meaningful lives we seek is the half formed, secret, and deeply dangerous suspicion that we may be immortal. So that's the reminder we need to have constantly with us. That was the fourth obstacle. Now, number five. The number five is the art of storytelling. How is that so? Let me read from the book. At moments of sorrow and exhaustion, it is only too easy to look back over the years and feel that our lives have, in a sense, been meaningless. We take stock of just how much has gone wrong, how many errors there have been, how many unfulfilled plans and frustrated dreams we have had. We may feel like the distraught, damned Macbeth who, on learning of his wife's death, exclaims at a pitch of agony that man is a cursed creature who struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. Life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That is from Macbeth, Act 5, Scene 5, written by Shakespeare, of course. No life can avoid an intermittently high degree of sound and fury. The question is whether it must also ultimately signify nothing. As Macbeth's lines hint, this will depend on who is telling the story. In the hands of Shakespeare's bracingly termed idiot, the story of a life may well turn into unintelligible and dispiriting gibberish. But with sufficient compassion and insight, we may be able to make something different and a great deal more meaningful and redemptive out of the same material. Only a small number of people ever self consciously write their autobiographies. It is a task we associate with celebrities and the very old, but it is, in the background, a universal activity. We may not be publishing our stories, but we are writing them in our minds nevertheless. Every day finds us weaving a story about who we are, where we are going, and why events happened as they did. Many of us are strikingly harsh narrators of these life stories. We declare our achievements puny, we berate ourselves for our faults, we perceive only the negative sides of our characters. We constantly give the advantage to the other side. We may feel that we are being objective, but it seems we are really rehearsing the case for an especially vicious imaginary prosecution. Yet, there is nothing necessary about our methods or our verdicts. There could be ways of telling very different, far kinder, and more balanced stories from the same sets of facts. Good narrators, ones who are fair minded and judicious, know how to display a range of narrative skills that keep unfair, partisan, and confidence destroying lines of attack at bay. These good narrators accept that lives can be meaningful even when they involve a lot of failure and humiliation. Mistakes are not dead ends, they are sources of information that can be exploited and put to work as guides to more effective subsequent action. The sound and fury can be made to yield hugely significant insights. The good storyteller appreciates that a life can remain meaningful even when it contains long passages that might appear at first glance to be merely a waste of time. We may spend a decade not knowing what we want to do professionally, trying out different jobs and never settling in any of them, testing our parents and enduring the skepticism of our friends. We may go through a succession of failed relationships that leave us confused and hurt. But these experiences don't have to be dismissed as meaningless. The wandering and the exploration may be intimately connected to our eventual development and growth. We needed the career crisis to understand our working identities. We had to fail at love to fathom our hearts. We cannot get anywhere important in one go. We must forgive ourselves the horrors of our first drafts. The good storyteller recognizes too, contrary to certain impressions, that there will always be a number of players responsible for negative events in a person's life. We are never the sole authors of our triumphs or of our defeats. It is therefore as unwarranted to take all the blame as to assume all the credit. Sometimes it really will be the fault of something or somebody else. The economy, our parents, the government, our enemies, or sheer bad luck. We should not take the entire burden of our difficulties upon our own shoulders. Good narrators are compassionate. At many points, we simply could not have known. We were not exceptionally stupid. We were like all humans, operating with limited information, trying to interpret the world with flawed and blinkered minds under the constant sway of emotions damaged by our past and only selectively capable of reason and calm. Finally, good narrators appreciate that events can count as meaningful even when they are not recognized as such by powerful authorities in the world at large. We may be holidaying in a tent rather than in the presidential suite, hanging out with our grandmother rather than a pop group, teaching children to read rather than buying and selling companies, and nevertheless lay claim to a legitimately meaningful life. We should not let false notions of prestige interfere with our attempts to focus on the aspects of our life stories that actually satisfy us. On our deathbeds, we'll inevitably know that much didn't work out, that there were dreams that didn't come to pass and loves that were rejected, friendships that could never be repaired, and catastrophes and hurts we never overcame. But we will also know that there were threads of value that sustained us, that there was a higher logic we sometimes followed, that despite the agonies, our lives were not mere sound and fury, that in our own way, at select moments at least, we did properly draw benefit from and understand the meaning of life. And that's how the book ends. It's a really short book, but straight away talks about the main issue, the meaning of life. I hope you enjoyed these two parts where we discussed first the sources of meaning of life and then second the obstacles in the meaning of life. And we'll continue discussing other books on this topic, that is the meaning of life, and we'll explore that idea more in the next few episodes. With that, I'll take your leave and I'll catch you the next time with another book. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.